It's an invisible sin, and one of the most destructive. In a brutally honest account, one leader tells of his descent into lust and his painful escape. We are highlighting Leadership Journal's Top 40, the best articles of the journal's 36-year history, presented in chronological order. Today we present 37, from 1982, an article that became a defining piece for the journal in its commitment to be both utterly realistic and doggedly redemptive. Driving through Wisconsin on vacation this summer, a leadership staff member passed a huge sign in the middle of the bucolic countryside. "Naughty things for nice people," it proclaimed, and, as if to prove it, a gigantic cuddly bear peered out from beside the words "adult novelties." "What's that mean, Dad?" came the question from the 10-year-old boy in the back of the van. "Yeah," piped up the siblings, "what's that all about, Dad?" Such questions abound these days, as media penetrate our homes and vehicles with not just sleazy sex, but carefully packaged titillations. One report has it that a recent convention of youth pastors created the highest rental of X-rated movies in the hotel's history. More than 80% of all customers signing up for cable TV opt for the erotic films. The availability and ubiquity of so much sexual enticement, the constant barrage of innuendos, and the non-stop polemic for indulgence inevitably attracts. Many rationales tempt the mind of the Christian leader. "I have to know what's going on. Voyeurism is better than adultery. I need moderation. Total deprivation isn't necessary." Admittedly, there are no easy answers. We cannot shut off either our brains or our glands. But consider the following article by a man in full-time ministry. The article is blunt, but we felt it important to be just this honest and realistic. Sexual temptations in many forms have always lured Christians, but today's opportunities and climate make this article especially relevant to all of us. Lust is the ape that gibbers in our loins. Tame him, as we will by day. He rages all the wilder in our dreams by night. Just when we think we're safe from him, he raises up his ugly head and smirks, and there's no river in the world flows cold and strong enough to strike him down. Almighty God, why dost thou deck men out with such a loathsome toy? Frederick Beckner. Godric. I am writing this article anonymously, because I am embarrassed for my wife and children, yes, but embarrassed most for myself. I will tell of my personal battle with lust, and if I believed I were the only one who fought in that war, I would not waste emotional energy dredging up stained and painful memories. But I believe my experience is not uncommon, is perhaps even typical of pastors, writers, and conference speakers. No one talks about it, no one writes about it, but it's there, like an unacknowledged cancer that metastasizes best when no one goes for X-rays or feels for lumps. I know I am not alone, because the few times I have opened up and shared my struggles with Christian friends, they have replied with doppelganger stories of exactly the same stages of awakening, obsession, possession. Years from now, when socio-historians sift through the documents describing our times, they will undoubtedly come up with elegant explanations of why men who grew up in church homes are oversexed and vulnerable to attacks of lust and obsession, and why women who grew up in those same environments emerged uptight and somewhat disinterested in sex. But I leave that to the future analysts. I remember vividly the night I first experienced lust, real lust, not the high school and college variety. Of course, as an adolescent I had drooled through Playboy, sneaked off to my uncle's room for a heart-thumping first look at hardcore pornography, and done my share of grappling and fumbling with my fiancé's clothes. I date my lust awakening, though, to the adult onslaught of mature, willful commitment to lust. It hit on one of my first trips away from home. My job required me to travel at that time, and, as I sat in a dingy motel room near the airport and flipped through the city guide of what to do in Rochester, New York, I kept coming back to one haunting photo of an exotic dancer, a former Miss Peach Bowl winner. The ad said she looked fresh and inviting, the enchanting kind of southern girl you see on TV commercials for fried chicken, only this one had no clothes on. Somehow, I had survived the 60s, sheltered from strippers and Woodstock-type nudity. and when I first saw the ad, I instinctively ruled her show out of bounds for me. But as I settled down to watch an inane TV show, her body kept looming before my mind with a simple question: why not? I began to think. Indeed, why not? To be an effective Christian, I had to experience all of life, right? Didn't Jesus himself hang around with prostitutes and sinners? I could go simply as an observer in the world, but not of the world. Rationalizations leaped up like flying buttresses to support my desires, and within 10 minutes I was bundled in the back seat of a taxi headed toward the seamy side of Rochester. I got the driver to let me off a few blocks away, just for safety's sake, and I kept glancing over my shoulder expecting to see someone I knew, or perhaps God would step in, efface my desires, and change my mind about the wisdom of the act. I even asked him about that, meekly. No answer. I walked into the bar between acts, and was then faced with a new experience of ordering a drink. My forehead sweating, I scanned my memory of westerns for an appropriate drink to order. Finally I decided on whiskey. I tried to make it sound casual, but the waitress flummoxed me by asking another question. How do you want it? How do I want it? What did she mean? What could I say? It seemed everyone in the bar was staring at me. A double, I stammered, sensing my naivete. She rolled her eyes slightly and asked, "Is On the Rocks okay?" Bolstered by my first fiery sips of whiskey, which I tried to stretch out so as not to have to order another, I sat with my eyes glued to the stage. Miss Peach Bowl was everything the ad had promised, with a figure worthy of a Wonder Woman costume. She danced superbly, and was something of an acrobat. She started fully clothed, and teased us with slow removals of each sequined article of clothing. Toward the end, when she wore only a G-string, whooping men near the stage bade her lean over and stuffed folded bills under the tiny swatch of cloth. She grinned invitingly. I stared in disbelief. In one final strobe-lit routine she cartwheeled nude across the stage. The flush of excitement created by my first whiskey, drunk too fast in spite of myself, the eye-popping spectacle of this gorgeous woman bearing all, and jiggling it in front of me, and the boisterous spirit of the all-male audience combined to overpower me. I walked out of the bar 2 hours later feeling strangely warmed, intensely excited, and surprised that nothing had actually happened to me. I suppose it's the same feeling that washes in after a big event like marriage, or graduation, or first intercourse for that matter. In just a few hours, you realize that, although in one sense everything has changed, in another sense nothing has changed. You are the same person. Lust shares with sins like envy and pride. The distinction of being invisible, slippery, hard to pin down, was what happened that night. A sin. I denied it to myself on the way home. To really rate as lust, I told myself, you must look on a woman so as to desire sexual intercourse with her. Isn't that what Jesus said? Whatever happened that night, I certainly couldn't recall desiring intercourse with Miss Peach Bowl. It was more private and distant than that. What happened quickly, was gone, and left no scars, or so I thought at the time. 10 years have passed since that awakening in wintry Rochester, 10 years spent never far from the presence of lust. The guilt caught up with me, and back in my motel room that very evening, I was already praying slobbery prayers for forgiveness. For a while that guilt kept me out of live shows, and limited my voyeurism to magazines and movies, but only for a while. For 10 years I have fought unremitting guerrilla warfare. Being the reflective sort, I have often pondered the phenomenon of lust. It is unlike anything else in my experience. Most thrills carry roller coasters, trips in airplanes, visits to waterfowl slows a certain edge of excitement. Once I have experienced them, and figured them out, I enjoy them, and will duplicate the experiences, if given the chance, but after a few tries, they no longer hold such a powerful gravitational attraction. Sex is utterly different. There is only so much to figure out. Every person who endures high school biology, let alone a sniggering sex education class, knows the basic shapes, colors, and sizes of the sexual organs. Anyone who has been to an art museum knows about women's breasts, Anyone who has hauled down a gynecology book in a public library knows about genitalia. Somehow, no amount of knowledge reduces the app. Health forces may, in fact, work concordantly. What strange power is it that allows a male gynecologist to clinically examine female sexual organs all day long? There is nothing left for him to learn, and yet return home and find himself quickly aroused by his wifely peekaboo blouse. An ape that gibbers in my loins, wrote novelist Frederick Beckner about lust, and no experience comes with such a feral force. And yet, maybe by labeling it an animal drive we have missed the main point of lust. No animal I have heard of spends its life fixating on sex. Females in most species invite attention only a few times a year or less. The rest of the time males obediently plod through the mundane routine of phylogeny, apparently never giving sex another thought. Humans are different. We have the freedom to center our lives inordinately in this one drive, without the harmony enforced by nature. Our females are biologically receptive the vast majority of the time, and no instinct inhibits us from focusing all our thoughts, behavior, and energy on sex. I have tried to analyze lust, to fractionate it down into its particulars. I take a Playboy centerfold and study it with a magnifying glass. It consists only of dots of 4 primary colors laid down by a printing press in a certain order. There is no magic on that page, only stipples of ink, which under magnification show flaws and blurs, but there is magic on that page. I can stare at it, burn the image in my mind, fondle it mentally for hours, even days. Blood steams up when I gaze on it. Early Marxists, heady with revolution, added sex to their list of human foibles needing alteration. Lenin pronounced his famous glass of water theory, legislating that the sexual act was of no more consequence than the quenching of thirst by a glass of water. Surely bourgeois morality would topple along with bourgeois banks and industries and religions. But in a few years, Lenin had to abjure the glass of water theory. By all reductionist logic, sex was like a glass of water, but sex proved immune to reductionist logic. It resisted being made of no consequence. Lenin, a historian, should have known better. Kings had renounced their thrones, saints their God, and spouses their lifetime partners, because of this strange demon of lust. Dialectical materialism hardly stood a chance. Books often question God's wisdom or goodness in allowing so much pain and sorrow in the world, and yet I have read none that question his goodness and wisdom in allowing so much sex and lust in the world. But I think the two may be parallel questions. Whether through creation or marred creation, or whatever, we can't get into that here. We ended up with sex drives that virtually impel us to break rules God laid down. Males reach their sexual peak at age 18, scientists tell us. In our culture, you can't even legally marry before then, so when a male marries, if he has remained chaste, he has already forfeited his time of greatest sexual prowess. Mark Twain railed against God for parceling out to each human a source of universal joy and pleasure at its peak in teenage years, then forbidding it until marriage and restricting it